So yes, my name is Ashleen Benson. I am a research associate with the Canadian Fisheries Research Network. I am a fisheries scientist by training, but I am working now with a holistic integrative team of social scientists and industry people and other fisheries scientists to try and identify methods for moving toward a more holistic approach to management. And what I'm going to present here today is one approach that we are using to identifying tools for moving incrementally in this direction. What's required when we're working in an integrative team is a mutual understanding of what we're talking about, what we're trying to achieve. And so this is more of a synthesis than novel research, because the end game here is to provide a document or a set of information that can be used by managers, as well as stakeholders, as well as other scientists to identify options for analysis and informing decisions. So this is a figure of a typical harvest control rule that we use in Canada. In Canada, we have the Fisheries Act, which is the primary legislation used to manage fisheries. We also have an emerging sustainable fisheries framework, which is our version of ecosystem-based management. Both of these together incorporate forage fish policies, ecosystem type of approaches, harvest control rules. And the point that's relevant for today's decision is that they are very much biological based. So they are very much in keeping with the past 30 years of fisheries management. Overlaid on these legislative and policy requirements, we do have other policies that are explicit in terms of a need to promote economic prosperity, shared stewardship, and improved governance. And I think it's fair to say that we tend to ignore these in Canada, primarily because we don't know exactly how to approach that. This slide shows an interpretation of the current management cycle in Canada. Is the main button the laser pointer? Oh yeah, okay. So right here, this is where the science, fishery science enters the process. And everything else is essentially a filter for that science. It's a political process, and that's where economics and social components are included. And so you can see that not only are these advisory meetings and negotiations the process by which information is filtered, but they also kind of muddy the waters. It's very difficult to get a transparent sense of how decisions are made, or whether we're even coming close to meeting objectives that we do have related to economics and social components. Another key trend in fisheries management in Canada and arguably in New Zealand and Australia is the move towards a business model for managing fisheries. So we start referring in most Canadian management documents as the industry is now the client of science. Ministers want to simplify decisions. They want a very nice, short planning window where everything is very clear. We want predictability, and we want user pay. So we want the industry to pay for information gathering. Now, what seems to be counter to the policy is this appears to be narrowing the suite of information that is going to be used for management. It seems to be sort of restricting it more and more towards biology, at least intuitively. If industry is going to pay for stock assessment, et cetera, we want it to be cheap and clearly defined. So why would we veer too far from the path? Well, one of the reasons we would is because of the issue of social license. So we take it as a given sometimes that the fishing industry can operate. But in other areas, such as Australia, the notion of social license, that is, that industry doesn't necessarily have a right to go fishing anymore because of NGOs who perceive and advertise negative ecological impacts, possibly negative social impacts. So here we have a concern of a big vessel and the impacts on local Aboriginal culture. We also have pretty prominent fishery scientists telling us that we need to incorporate social and economic components in order to improve management. So it isn't necessarily true that moving towards a business model for science is going to narrow the scope of what we are required to do. So in reality, what we are being asked to do here is to broaden the type of information that we're using in a regional advisory process in order to make it transparent for the decision making. And I think that is the key challenge that we have here. And the question I have as a fishery scientist is, where do we start? And I think it's important, given the type of discussion that we've had in this meeting, it's very statistical, very mathematically oriented, is to remind ourselves that fishery science is a holistic field that extends beyond math and statistics. It is about fisheries, ecology, and management. And management is, in effect, a function of decision-making, decision analysis, and management science. That is social science. Many, many people refer to this component as social science. So we are already doing it. We're at least incrementally on that path. So what I'm here to remind us all, including myself, is that we do have a job that extends beyond stock assessment. Now, when I started looking in the literature about which methods we could use to work towards more holistic approaches, there's a lot that kind of pop up as, in further research, we can begin to include social and economic components and move towards more holistic management in every one of these. We've also had key managers in DFO, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, very high policymakers, coming to us and saying, what are these things? How do we choose from among these options for moving towards this more holistic approach? Among the scientists that I've had conversations with, we tend to have difficulty in distinguishing between things like structured decision-making, adaptive management, management strategy evaluation. We've had people say to us, these are all the same thing, just get on with it. We also have people saying the only option that we can implement here is marine spatial planning. So what I'm arguing for here is that we need to at least take a look at these, look at the pros and cons of each of these, and begin to develop, Rob refers to it as a report card or a menu in which we can begin to talk to our industry partners and our managers about what we're actually talking about when we tend to use buzzwords like this. So, reflecting on the fact that we are a decision analytical field, it's important to recognize that there's a variety of types of decisions that we make. We talked about the best assessment model approach, and that seems to be quite in keeping here with the choosing of a single preferred alternative. Management strategy evaluation is kind of moving us in the stream towards making efficient, repeated decisions. Mike Hawkshaw yesterday, he came up with a novel approach for looking at linked decisions. So he used linear programming as an assessment model. So we have at our hands a variety of tools already. We just need to consider them in context. We need to really paint the picture of what we're looking at right now. And so in addition to the types of decisions that we're making, the decisions are made in a variety of contexts. We have different scopes from single species to ecosystem. We have different geographical scales. In BC, or in Canada, British Columbia where I'm from, we tend to focus on fisheries. But I think in the Atlantic region, there is a bit more discussion at the level of communities and regions. And of course, nationally, we talk about ecosystems. We need to consider what type of advice managers are looking for. Sometimes they're looking for tactical, sort of year-over-year decision-making, and sometimes they're really asking us to be creative and strategic in the type of information that we can give them. We, in Canadian fisheries, Andy was giving us an example of the type of information that managers are now asking for. They're asking for uncertainty as opposed to, giving us the optimal answer. But that isn't the case across the board in Canadian fisheries. We still have certain managers asking for the right answer. So we are seeing somewhat of an evolution, but we do really need to consider, if we're going to bring the manager along for the ride, we do need to kind of get to their level and start talking to them in these terms. So our approach has been to take an inventory of methods, and this is just a subset of stuff we've looked at. As you move from left to right across the table, it's basically moving away from the status quo or the current system in terms of information that can be provided. The current system we've already characterized as stock assessment of varying degrees of complexity plus politics. Typically, I would argue the goal of analysis is still the best assessment model. We call it BAM in the lab that I'm working on. The nature of advice is prescriptive. We give a recommendation that tells one preferred option. The scale of advice is, as I said, at the fishery, and we tend to do tactical management. Across the top, we have management strategy evaluation, which we've heard a little bit about here, which is basically assessing impacts of a range of possible management options. So we are, in effect, opening the landscape up and showing managers that there's a variety of alternatives and that the current system can be modified. The ecosystem risk assessment framework was developed in Australia, and it's a really neat procedure by which activities and fisheries are ranked for assessment or management input, so that in recognition that you can't afford to do a full ecosystem type of analysis every year. It's very clever. And then, of course, Tony spoke about the end-to-end models earlier this morning. So we are characterizing the types of methods that are available for basically in our menu of approaches. And we're describing them in terms of the goal of the analysis, in terms of the nature of advice. I have an asterisk on MSE here because there are instances in which management strategy evaluation is used to provide prescriptive advice in order to identify one harvest control rule or to evaluate a management procedure. But I think its intent is more holistic. It is about providing a descriptive analysis to managers and really bringing people on board to think big. But we can debate that, and I'm sure we will. The scale of advice, again, it's fishery level over on these two. The ecosystem risk assessment framework has multiple scales because we are working from an ecosystem down to prioritize individual activities. And then the end-to-end models are, again, at the ecosystem level. What's important for this talk is that the application of each of these methods can be vastly different. So the current system is tactical. MSE, as its name suggests, is strategic. It can also provide tactical information. And the ecosystem risk assessment framework is ranking, and end-to-end models are arguably still at the research level. And this kind of information, it seems obvious, but when you start having conversations with people about different tools and different techniques, it's really clear that not everybody is on board with this understanding. So what may seem remedial in this room is actually quite useful when you're talking to senior level bureaucrats and others. So I was in Australia a couple of months ago, and I was really impressed by how they characterized the fisheries management process. So whereas Canadians have this kind of cycle of politics and science, they have viewed fisheries management as a nested set of activities where you have overarching drivers. You then characterize the fishery or the attributes of the fishery, whether it's effort control, input control, there's cost recovery functions, all of that stuff is at this level. And then there's the harvest strategy, the decision rule, the stock assessment, the data collection. And when you begin to view it in this way, the problem is just that much more tractable. And so I would argue that we're looking, thank you, to reframe this process here of science in terms of this kind of nested hierarchy of understanding. So as we move towards that, we are conducting an evaluation of the appropriateness of tools at the fishery level, or perhaps even at the harvest strategy level. Because our initial goal with this project was to look at our current system and think incrementally, how can we step towards this more holistic management without requiring a complete change in governance, because we know that's not realistic. So again, this is a fishery level evaluation of a variety of methods. We like to look at innovative uses for the different methods. And the current system, we heard from the IPHC that they've been using climate, they've all sorts of iterations. There's a variety of different things that are done with single species assessment. But arguably, the ability of these assessments and the current process to integrate diverse information in a defensible way is low. The ease of understanding by a variety of stakeholders, including high-level bureaucrats, individual fishermen, biologists, and stock assessment scientists, is low. Stakeholder participation in general is low. Because it is a political process, we have rated the scientifically defensible advice as high and low. So we can get really, strongly supported stock assessment information, but again, then we go into the void of where the economics and social stuff comes in, and we have no idea what's going on. So it's sort of a mixed situation. It isn't necessarily cost effective. As we heard again from the IPHC, the cost of a stock assessment can be very high, and there's a tendency to proceed along the road of trying to improve a stock assessment without tethering it to a commensurate improvement in management performance in this type of system. But the bonus is that we don't actually need to do much if we want to stay on this road. It's very easy to stay where we are. So this is an overview of our initial evaluation of these methods at the fishery level. The main point for this talk is that as we move towards the end-to-end models and the ecological risk assessment framework, we start to see more loads. And the option that is highlighted for probably future work here is management strategy evaluation. It appears from a first qualitative look that this is where the most innovation can come in moving incrementally towards including holistic type of criteria. And again, I point back to Australia, where they have begun to do very interesting work at the level of the harvest strategy, where they are including economic criteria as sort of a second phase in the assessment. So I think it was the Pippi fishery where they did a stock assessment, and if it said, let's go, that we can increase the quota, there was a second phase, and there needed to be a showing of, was it gross vessel profit had to increase by some fixed percent at a minimum before the quota could be increased. So they are beginning to do very interesting things at the harvest strategy level. So the overarching conclusion of this work so far is that it's management strategy evaluation is our best bet for moving towards more holistic approach in the near term. And that's it. Thank you.